Sugar Daddy Podcast, yo. Learn how to make them pockets grow. Financial freedom's where we go. Smart investments, money flow.
Hey, babe. What are we talking about today?
Well, with the presidential election right around the corner, we are going to do our best to provide a non-biased overview of the two economic plans being proposed by Kamala Harris and Donald Trump.
Yay! Well, by the time you listen to this, there will be 34 days until the election, which is not very much. So make sure that if you have not registered to vote, that you are registered, that you are checking your voter registration. Do not be that person that doesn't know where you're voting, if your registration is up to date, did your precinct change, all those things. Go ahead and look at that now. You can go to vote.org and you can also see who is on your ballot, because we know that there's so much more at stake than quote unquote just the presidency. So we need to make sure that we understand who is up for election, re-election in our state and local governments as well. So make sure that you check out all of those resources. Vote.org will get you where you need to go.
Yeah, we over here are voters. We vote in every election. So we're not going to tell you who to vote for, but we do encourage you to vote, because I think a lot of people actually don't realize that up until this last election, the largest demographic of, groups that affect the electoral outcome was actually people who didn't vote. I believe in not this last election, but the previous one before that, it was almost 40% of people that are eligible to vote in the United States did not vote.
Yeah.
So,
this is our duty. This is what democracy is. And be an educated and informed voter. If you're listening to the news, to podcasts, you're doing your own reading, you're doing your own research, great. But please don't be that person that is just listening to Bob on Facebook, rant about whatever people rant about. And that is how you're making your decision for who's going to be president, who's going to be governor, senator. I mean, like all these things, all of the elected officials, they are in place to do the work of the people. And so be informed. There's absolutely no excuse to not be an informed voter in 2024 when we have the internet, we have resources literally at our fingertips. And, read through lots of different articles and lots of different news sources so that you're not just getting a one-sided view. For example, we, will watch CNN, but then we will also turn to Fox and see what they're saying. We read the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. And again, we're trying to get information from lots of different places, not just one single source, because we know that media is media is media, and we want to be informed voters. And ladies, for anybody listening, listen, please don't be that person that is voting like my husband votes and just being uninformed, or being that person that says, well, my husband told me to vote for so-and-so, so that's what I'm going to do. Don't be that person. Do better. We deserve better than that. And also remember, your vote is private. So if your husband is voting one way and that does not serve you in your female body, then guess what? He doesn't need to know how you voted.
And you, like I said, once again, you need to vote, especially when it comes to demographics that have not always had the right to vote. As a Black man, my ancestors fought and died for my right to vote, so I will always exercise my right to vote. And I don't think there's anything I should expect less from my peers also that look like myself.
Yeah.
Get out there and vote.
Not voting is a vote, like Brandon said at the beginning of this, and not voting because you don't want to pick the lesser of two evils or whatever it is that people say. No, don't be that person.
Someone's going to be elected regardless of you participating in the process or not. They're not going to be like, oh, you're not voting, so we're just going to put the election on pause. That's not how that works. So you need to pick at least the person that you can agree with the most.
Yeah.
Whoever that may be.
Or that doesn't terrify you, potentially.
Yes, you have to vote because, like I said, someone is still going to be elected regardless of you participating in the process or not. And honestly, certain sides are hoping that you don't participate in the process.
Yes.
Because it is in their favor. Because I can tell you people who always vote. Old white men, they always vote.
That's so true. It's so true. Yeah. So get to the polls, vote early, do your absentee ballot, do whatever you need to do to make sure that your voice is heard. That is literally what democracy is all about.
So now we're going to get down into kind of some of the details. So a lot of the talking points revolve around, a few of their most talked about economic plans, the ideas that they're proposing as far as their platform if they were to be elected as president. So I'm going to start out with Kamala Harris as far as some of the main ones that people are talking about. First one I'm going to talk about is she wants to increase the long-term capital gains tax on anyone who has an income of $1 million or more annually. So currently, long-term capital gains, the highest tax you would pay on that is 20%, and she's looking to increase it to 28%. All right.
I think the key, though, that people need to zoom in on is how much was it that people need to make in order to get this additional taxation?
Let's take a step back because I'm not going to assume that everyone knows what capital gains tax is to begin with.
Okay.
Or
Perfect.
that there's a difference between short-term and long-term capital gains tax.
Okay.
All right. So a capital gains tax is the tax that is paid by individuals based upon the gains on stocks that they sell in a given year.
Okay.
All right. Now, there are two different types of capital gains tax. There's a short-term capital gains tax and a long-term capital gains tax. So for the short-term capital gains, if you were to purchase a stock and then sell it in less than a year, then you would pay short-term capital gains. And what that tax is, then basically whatever gain you have is taxed as your ordinary income tax rate. So, for example, we're talking about wealthy people, so let's use their income taxes. The highest current federal tax rate is 37%. So if I was to buy a stock and sell it in less than a year, it would count as ordinary income tax for me and more than likely be taxed at that 37%. All right.
Okay.
Now, if I was to buy a stock and I hold it for a year and 1 day, and then after that I sell it, then that's long-term capital gains. And with long-term capital gains, you could be taxed at 0, 15, 20%. Big difference is that for wealthy people, the most they would be taxed on that is 20%. So you're looking at the difference of ordinary income tax rate where they could be taxed as high as 37% compared to as high as they can with capital gains being 20%.
That's a 17% difference.
Yeah.
That makes a difference.
So they were looking to, you always hear from, the left saying that, wealthy people don't pay their fair share. I'm not here to debate whether they do or they don't. That's just the verbiage that they use. All right. So I still look at it this way. Either way, even if they were to potentially raise it to 28%, that's still less than what you'd be paying in ordinary income tax rate. So you're still a win, technically, but you would still be increasing what you currently pay in taxes. Because I could tell you one thing, the way that the wealthy receive their income is completely different than the way that, us ordinary people do. All right. So for example, a lot of people obviously have businesses, so they're taxed a little bit differently when it comes to that. But we're just going to stick to people, for example, wealthy CEOs. All right. You might have a CEO of a Fortune 100 company that makes a total compensation in a given year of $30 million. But their actual W-2 income salary is less than $2 million. Mm-hmm. And the remaining amount of that is made up in stock shares that are given to them. All right. So let's just make it easy. If it's $2 million they received in income, that's going to be taxed as ordinary income tax rate. The other $28 million, that's going to be taxed on some form of capital gains. And more than likely, they're going to hold it for at least a year and a day and then sell it if that's what they're going to do. And the max they would be taxed on that is 20%. And that's the issue that people kind of have, is saying that wealthy people don't pay their fair share.
Yeah. But we already know that the rules were not made for normal people, right? The wealthy made the rules and they are going to utilize the rules. And it's a matter of understanding them and utilizing them to your benefit. So whether we agree or disagree, it really does sometimes feel like a game. And if you don't know the rules, then you're never going to win.
And the thing is, too, is that this plan affects only people who make an income of $1 million or more a year.
So, but this brings us to the people who are like on TikTok and on social media that are like, oh, she wants to raise capital gains and da-da-da-da-da. And listen, are you making $1 million a year?
Well, here's the thing, is that proposed idea itself would not directly affect individuals because majority of people don't obviously make $1 million or more a year. That's less than 1% of the, US population that does that. All right. But we're going to get into the pros and cons of this proposed plan.
Okay.
So the idea behind, one of the major pros of the plan is that it would ideally put more tax money into the US system to be used for various US needs. One, mainly paying down the national debt that we have, but then also being able to hopefully fund other programs that are necessary for, the United States and would definitely serve the more underprivileged individuals. That's the idea behind it.
Is the United States actually trying to pay off its debts?
I mean, I don't necessarily think so.
I mean, there's nothing about the way our system operates that makes me think they're like, ooh, we got to get back in the black. We got to get in the green.
I don't disagree with you because
they're out here giving us credit scores.
They don't ever balance a budget.
Yeah, and their budgets are a hot mess. I mean, the audacity.
Now, from the economic standpoint of just like looking at it, this could potentially affect us in other ways, So what ends up happening is that if you were to increase the capital gains tax on the selling of stocks for the, wealthy, they could potentially just sell less stocks and find another way to, handle that income. So by selling less stocks, then you're not going to even get the 20% taxes that you were getting, and that could potentially lead to less tax money.
Because you're only getting taxed the 20% over the million?
No. So I'll take it a step back. So currently, the highest capital gains tax is 20%.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to raise that to 28%, then wealthy people will find another way to handle that income and not sell that stock. So therefore, instead of, you getting the 20% that you would have gotten, now you're going to get zero. So that's going to lower the amount of tax money that we have to pay our national debt, handle all the various programs that the United States needs tax money to fund.
Interesting.
Because the reality is that wealthy people run the world. There's all types of ways for them to figure out to navigate and circumvent these rules one way or another. To make it long story short,
part of your compensation package is stocks and they've been awarded. What are you just going to let them sit there?
Yeah, you let them sit there and you borrow against them. That's another thing that people don't realize is that when you could put the stock up as collateral and borrow from the banks.
Yeah, because remember, when poor people borrow money, aka have loans or credit cards, etc., then it's a negative thing. But when rich people borrow money, it's considered leverage, and they give it a whole new word and they make it sound fancy and exclusive, but you're really doing the exact same thing. You're borrowing money so that you don't have to use your own personal money.
Yes, I mean, like I said, there's pros and cons. We kind of just went through both of those. But at the end of the day, I think if you focus so much on trying to tax the wealthy more, they're probably going to focus just even more to find a way to circumvent it.
Create new rules.
Yeah, because they're the ones that create the rules. So, also the reality is that, I mean, the probability of this passing Congress is probably not high. Because you gotta remember the people in Congress also, like, you see the salaries that they make, as far as from being a congresswoman, person, man, whatever, but they make a lot more in other ways. So they're not, the poor people. Right. So, they're not going to necessarily make rules that
don't benefit
them
monetarily.
Like, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on. Let's be honest. Yeah. Now, one of the other part of Harris's economic plan is that she wants to tax unrealized gains on people who have a net worth of $100 million or more.
So how many people is that?
Even less than the previous number we spoke.
It's not you listening.
It's not you listening, okay?
It's not us. It's not you. It ain't none of us. Not yet. We're going to speak it into existence.
Now, to clarify what an unrealized gain is that you have these stocks that you bought, but you haven't sold them. So in the previous one we were talking about with the realized gains, you sold the stock. So now you have a quote unquote realized profit. With unrealized gains, your stock might have increased in value from what you bought it at, but you haven't sold it. So quote unquote, it's not really actual cash in hand. All right. So there are actually, the only pro to that would be more money supposedly being put into the tax system to help with, government programs, funding, paying down national debt. That's really the main idea behind this as far as a pro. Now, as someone who works in finance, I can see a lot of negatives to it. Although it's, for most people, they probably don't think about these.
Like
All
what?
right. Well, in order to pay the taxes on unrealized gains, you're going to have to end up selling them. You're going to have to sell some stock in order to handle these unrealized gains. Because most people have a lot more unrealized gains than they have realized.
Mm-hmm.
Because they just have, their money that they're piling up that they, is not actual cash in hand. So in order to pay taxes on money that they quote unquote don't necessarily have, they're going to have to sell more stocks. So to kind of give you like an idea of some of the numbers here is that the individual we're talking about, that have $100 million in unrealized, multimillionaires pushing into billionaires. Billionaires own approximately 7% of the stock market. 7% of that is owned by billionaires.
Hmm.
So that equates around $5 trillion. All right. If you had to sell in order to pay taxes on these unrealized gains, that's hundreds of billions of dollars that's going to be sold in stocks within the stock market. And when you have a sell off that high, it actually tanks the value of that stock. So by selling off that amount of money in the stock market, it is actually going to have a negative reaction for the stock market. It's going to cause everything to drop. Now, how does that affect the regular person? We may not be billionaires. We don't have $100 million plus net worth or whatever it may be, but we do have 401k plans. You do have 403bs. You do have IRAs. You do have pensions and other types of retirement plans that are all dependent upon the performance of the stock market. So if you have these billionaires having to sell off massive amounts of stocks in the stock market, and that drives down the stock market, that's going to affect your 401k plan. It's going to affect your pension. It's going to decrease the values of those.
Could you imagine being so rich that you selling your stock could literally impact hundreds of millions of people?
Well, that's how it works.
That's insanity.
Large money affects the stock market. Institutional moves by, Vanguard, BlackRock, the way that they move money affects how the market actually can perform.
Yeah. And it's just wild, though, just to think, how many billionaires are there in the United States? And then them affecting, what's happening in our 401ks and our IRAs. And that's a lot of power.
And that's the part of the plan that most people don't think all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping that she's thought about this aspect, but she's saying it in the sense that it sounds good to the common person who's her base, but she knows it's not going to actually happen.
Well, that's the other thing, right? I think in both, whether there is a plan or not a plan, regardless of sides, all the things, right? It's like, well, they can also say whatever they want and then get in office and be like, oh, well, our priorities have shifted, or, oh, we can't do that anymore. Or, everybody's like, it feels very much like everybody's in bed together, paying Peter, robbing Paul, like just to get done what people need to get done.
Yeah.
And if you vote on somebody's plan thinking that that's going to be fully executed, you're probably going to get your feelings hurt because we've all been, if you're in that elder millennial Gen X type bracket, like we've been voting long enough to know that there are absolutely false promises. There are things that don't get passed. There are, do not put your eggs in these baskets of what one person is saying they're going to do or try to do, because the reality is they could flip on a dime, honestly.
Yeah. There's no law in place that requires them to follow through with the platforms that they ran on and, were potentially elected on.
Yeah, which I think is also a problem, but we're not going to solve that in today's episode.
I'm not an economist by any means. I work in financial services, but I understand this aspect. So I know they have to be speaking to other people that have said this to them.
Yeah, hopefully they're speaking to really smart people.
If they have not thought through this process, there's way more issues in this country than that. Because like I said, I am not by no means the smartest person when it comes to this area. And I understand that this is a potential outcome of this plan.
Let's keep going.
All right. So hopping over to Donald Trump's plan, and, we lean a certain way, but I'm going to try to provide this information without any bias. It's just basically looking off of the plan and giving the pros and cons of the plan. So the one thing you always hear Donald Trump talk about is tariffs. Tariffs, tariffs, tariffs. So first and foremost, what is a tariff? A tariff is a tax on an import. All right.
And we import a lot.
We do import a lot. And you always hear, main thing he talks about is the tariffs that he puts on China. And and simply walk around your house and look at where the things are made.
China. They're made in China.
We import a lot of things from China. All right. So what a tariff does is that it puts, like I said, it puts a tax on that country in regards to us importing goods from that country. So therefore, the country that we're importing it from pays more to send the goods here. All right. Now, the idea behind this from a pro standpoint would be that this would promote growth from within the US. So the idea behind this is that if we're putting tariffs on other countries to import stuff, then that's going to be the fire that fuels the United States to start, producing these things themselves, so that we don't have to import these things from other countries.
But there's a reason that we import things from other countries.
We're going to get to that. That's the idea behind it. So the idea is that you stimulate, business growth and job growth within the U.S. to create these products within the United States. All right. Now, the con is that when you put a tax on imported goods, that increase is just simply passed down to the consumer.
AKA, we are going to pay more if we are charging more. It's like that quid pro quo, like tit for tat, like, well, if you're going to screw me, I'm going to screw you.
Yeah. Think about anything that's made, for example, like, when there was a lumber shortage and people were looking to maybe build a fence. The people that were building the fence had to pay more for the materials to build the fence. And that increase in materials was simply passed down to the person having the fence built.
Which is crazy because we were having a deck built during COVID. The cost, we ended up doing a Trex deck, which normally would have been way out of our price range, but it ended up being the same price as wood. And so it's like, you don't have to stain it. It's practically indestructible. It has all these benefits. And so we just went with the Trex decking because the wood was so expensive at that time. But same concept of like, oh, now this wood is the same price as this other product that normally would have cost us 30% more. Yeah,
so the price is passed on to the consumer. And
we're already struggling, y'all. We're already struggling. Life is so expensive. It doesn't matter if you're a high earner, if you're making $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 a year. Like when you go to the grocery store, when you fill up for gas, you are seeing the increase of what life is costing us these days.
Yeah, if you think inflation's bad now, increasing the tariffs is just going to make it worse because currently the United States imports more than we export.
Well, and we also know that it's not actually inflation, it's corporate greed.
Yeah, there's also price gouging there.
Exactly.
So it's hard for us to determine which is which, but right. I can assure you that if, the goods that we import increase from tariffs, then that increase in cost is going to be passed on to us.
Yeah.
Very
simple. Thank you.
I mean, now I understand the premise behind the idea, but the execution is terrible. So the idea is like, so for example, if you want to increase the tariffs on other countries when it comes to imports, first thing you need to do is provide that infrastructure for businesses and jobs to produce these goods in the United States. Once we got a good job on, a good established track of producing these goods, and we can actually not necessarily have to import them if we don't want to, now you can go ahead and throw a tariff on somebody else.
Yeah.
But if you're going to throw a tariff on somebody else and we still need the goods because we don't currently produce them, what do you think that's going to lead to?
That's a recipe for disaster.
Yes.
That's terrible.
So, you have that there. All right. Now, the next part is that he's talking about, one, not taxing tips for individuals who receive a good portion of their income from tips, not taxing those. Also, in addition, not taxing overtime pay. And also not taxing Social Security.
Which, on face value, right? When you hear it, you're like, ooh, no taxes? That's amazing. Think about all the people who are working in establishments where, let's say they're a bartender or wait staff at a restaurant. Like the bulk of your income is coming from tips. So when you hear that initially, you're like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. I get to keep more money.
Yeah.
But the ramifications of not being properly taxed or not being taxed are actually, in my opinion, a lot worse than being taxed.
Well, we'll get to that as far as from the individual standpoint. But, first, the pro being that the idea is that for the American person, they have more money in their pocket. So that additional money that you're bringing in, you're not being taxed on it. Yay. None of us like paying taxes.
No.
But, it is what it is. So the idea is that I'm going to say this because no one likes paying taxes and it sounds great. Now, the con to this issue is that currently national debt's pretty high if you haven't checked lately, which you probably haven't because you're like, it's not quote unquote my debt, it's the nation's debt and whatever it may be.
Yeah. And what can I really do about it? Nothing.
But the national debt is extremely high. And one of the main ways, newsflash to some people, the government is not a for-profit industry. So they don't necessarily make money. Now, we can argue they print money, but they don't make any money. So the way they fund a lot of the programs and also pay down the national debt is through taxation. That's the number one way. So if you have the national debt at an all-time high, and you are now cutting taxes for everybody, because don't forget, in addition to these plans, he's also talking about cutting corporate tax. So he's just going to cut taxes for everybody. That's not how that works. Like, that's not going to be a recipe for good. Like, you're not going to be able to handle the national debt. You're not going to be able to continue to fund the programs that need to be funded by cutting the main source of money to fund these programs.
Taxes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and also the thing is too, is that kind of like going to what I think Jess was going to go into is that I think a lot of people don't realize, for example, that in order to qualify for a lot of loans, so, qualifying for a mortgage on a home, qualifying for a car loan, whatever it may be, that's based off of your income. So if a good portion of your income comes from either tips or overtime that you're doing, that's not going to show up on your tax return then. So when you go to apply for a loan or a mortgage, it's going to show that you make less income than you actually do. So you may not qualify for the loan that you need for that home, or you may not qualify, for the best rates for the car loan that you're looking at.
Yeah. There was, I saw something recently online for one of the other personal finance creators that I follow, and he was talking about how, he was making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, but he works for himself, went to go buy this condo, which was over $700,000. And the bank was like, you're not, we don't want to lend to you because he works for himself and didn't have a long enough stint of, income on paper. Like if you work for a corporation and you're getting a steady paycheck every 2 weeks, like that is much more attractive, even if it's a lower amount, than somebody who's an entrepreneur and their rates, their income fluctuates. And, you might be making hundreds of thousands of dollars, but maybe 1 month you're not. And then, whatever. So it was interesting because he ended up buying the condo in cash because he had it in cash because he wasn't able to get a loan with the right terms that he wanted. And so if you're thinking about that, even for you, as a business owner, you're writing things off, you're, putting money back into the business, et cetera. And so when it comes to who's going to get a better rate for the mortgage or for cars, it's always me because I'm the one with the corporate job versus you whose income fluctuates because you work for yourself. So those are things that you should think about and consider, especially if you're, if you are working a tip job or you do a lot of overtime, you work for yourself, like these are things that you're going to have to think about. And then also keep in mind, he's not saying you're not going to pay taxes. So you're still going to have to file your taxes and make sure that you're being a good steward of your, but if you're trying to buy a home or, lease an apartment, et cetera, those things could be negatively impacted.
And the thing for me is that both, sides of the aisle, they do say things that sound great to their base, but aren't actually actionable. That's going to be beneficial to the economy of the country as a whole. I would like to keep more of my money as well.
Yes.
But I also realize that there's a trade-off to that if I'm not taxed on a certain amount of my income. And then also too, to our potential, listeners out there that are salary workers. If you're a salary employee, that overtime doesn't apply to you.
Right.
And there's also one other thing that's kind of like, iffy. Now, I have not heard him state this, but what if you were to, as far as like, the CEOs, VPs, execs, whatever it may be, the people that make a lot more money, what if they were to start trying to reclassify their payments as far as their income that they receive from their employer in order to circumvent paying taxes on that?
I'm sure that would happen.
Because what if they have, what if that CEO goes to, I work this number of hours and then this other portion over here, and now this is overtime pay.
Mhm.
And so they're not taxed on it. So like there's the potential for that as well.
It's going to get crazy out in these streets.
But the idea was just to kind of like, provide, now, obviously there's more details of different parts of their platform that they're running on and stuff of that nature. But we want to highlight some of the ones that are been talked about the most and kind of give you, the information on it, but then also kind of give you a little bit of our take. I think we did a pretty decent job of, non-biased, because the reality is that we are definitely more to the left. Now, when it comes to you determining what it is that is your determining factor for who you're going to vote for, honestly, I don't like either economic plan. So our vote is not based off of the economic plan. That's just the reality, because I think there's improvement that could happen on both sides when it comes to the economic plan. The difference for us is that this is more of a moral / social issues.
Right.
That's how we're determining, our vote. Who do we think has a better moral character, and who is going to...
And competence. Character and just plain competence. Let's
Yes,
be real.
incompetence, because I do believe that there needs to be a certain degree of showing that you are willing to put in the work to do the job. And I, don't think that one individual who's had the job before has shown us that he's willing to put in the work.
Yeah.
There's a difference between wanting to be president and wanting to do president.
Well,
and then also the
I
people...
think there's one person is in it for themselves and one person is in it for the people. I think that's very clear.
And it's also putting other people around you that are competent. So there's so many different people within, a presidential administration that help with running that administration, and putting competent people into the different roles is also a big part on the success of that administration. And I have way more faith in one side putting competent people into these roles as compared to just maybe putting your friends into those roles.
Yes. Your friends who are your friends while you can use them, but then once they realize that you're a nut job, then you turn on them.
I was trying to be less biased than Jess.
Yeah, that's fine. If you listen to this podcast, you know how we're voting, and it comes down to morality. I don't care what side you're on. These are not the normal candidates for, Republican versus Democrat. This is a moral compass alignment. And if you are voting with people who endorse the KKK and white supremacy groups, you're not our people. So
we are in a very different political environment. I was watching a video the other day, and it was like a montage of, presidential debates, going all the way back to like before, like, basically going back to like JFK time frame. Because I think JFK was that time frame where the first debates were kind of being televised. But going back to that time period and how, like, regardless of, two candidates being on separate sides of the aisle, there was still a mutual respect for one another. There was a certain degree of decorum that was always present. Over the past few years, we've moved so far away from that. And I'm not saying that I'm not going to sit here and try to point fingers for one side or the other, because I think we lean left. There are things on the left side that we could also do better at. But there was one individual that came into the play, and he's the one that kind of changed the way that everything was done.
Listen, if you cannot vote for yourself because you are a felon, you should not be on the ballot. That is going to be my last statement until the end of time. If I cannot tell my children that this is somebody that has carried themselves with respect, that treats people with respect, that treats veterans with respect, that treats women with respect, if I cannot tell my children, hey, this is the president of the United States, they are of high character, high moral ground, they are somebody that you could potentially look up to, etc., you're not my candidate. You are not my candidate. I cannot have my children in the room because I do not know what this man is going to say. It's very clear. He is reckless. And listen, you did a really good job trying to just present the facts, which was at the beginning of this episode, but it is very clear that there is one competent choice. And I think it's interesting too, because we, live in North Carolina and we're a swing state and we have moved, quote unquote, into the country. And why is it that the people with, vending machines and washing machines in their front yard think that them voting for somebody who was literally born with a silver spoon and millions of dollars is going to do anything for them? Sir, you have a washing machine in your front yard. It just blows my mind. The flags and the signs and all the things. And I'm like,
It doesn't blow my mind only because of the way I think that people think about things. One, unfortunately, with so much access to information, we also have access to a lot of incorrect information, which is why we do our best to provide you with, factual information. So everything that I stated about the plants, that was not, my opinion. That was not my opinion. Those were the basis of their plans. And you need to do your own research, and I think you also need to determine what is your determining factor for, selecting a candidate. What is a make or break for you, and that's not going to be the same for everyone. I mean, I wish there was some uniformity of which, we could have a moral standard across the board that most people would abide by, in society. But at this point in time, I don't think there is. And for us, it's the moral part. There are certain things that have been done and said that I can only see a white male getting away with certain things that have been said and done. And there's no debating that, because I'm going to go on my little side now, because unfortunately, if Donald Trump was the exact same person as he is, only he was a black man, he would have gotten nowhere near Washington. Nowhere near it. And that's just the reality. And like I said, if Donald Trump was a white woman, he wouldn't have gotten this close to Washington.
Yeah. I'm just ready. I want to go back to the scandals of the tan suit and shoulders being out, because if that is the worst thing that somebody can say about a person is, I'm aghast, look at that tan suit. Like, that is somebody that my children can be in the room when the TV is on.
Also, hindsight's 2020, like I said, we've been voting for a little while now, and going back to thinking when, like, for example, during the Bush years, you think that's so bad.
Please can have Bush back.
I think every person on the left would take Bush back in a hot second.
Let's take Bush. Bush, where are you? Well, because again, the morality wasn't in question, right? The character wasn't in question. Your safety wasn't in question. There's nothing in my mind that says that Bush wouldn't denounce white supremacy in a heartbeat. You know what I mean? So if you can't say in your microphone, I denounce white supremacy, I denounce hate groups, et cetera, because those are the people whose votes you're relying on, so you can't denounce it, that's a problem. That's a problem for me and my brown self, my brown husband, my brown children, my brown family. That completely.
And I don't want people, like, I know it's gonna, if they watch this, on YouTube or whatever, it's gonna be people that say he did denounce it or whatever. And the reality is that when he was asked on national TV, he did not. His team made him do damage control later on.
The damage was done.
And I mean, like, I don't personally know anybody that if I asked them that question, they'd be confused.
Listen.
So with that being said, we're going to stop there because, as I said before, we're a financial literacy podcast, and we do our best to provide you with, non-biased, accurate information so that can help you improve your financial life. And like I said, with the upcoming election, look at these economic plans and see which ones, you align a little bit more with, and do your own research. Don't necessarily just rely upon our podcast. We gave you a starting point, but you can go to each of their websites and see more details about what their platform is that they're running on.
But also remember that things are clickbait, right?
Yes.
Oh, increase in capital gains, or those are all clickbait headlines and titles. Go beneath the surface. Challenge yourself to really understand, well, what does it mean? Because if you didn't know, for example, that it only is going to affect people with a, income of $1 million or more, well, guess what? Your neighbor Bob down the road who's like, well, I can't have that capital gains tax. Bob, shut up. No, stop.
And even more important, with your local elections, go to their websites and see what their platforms are, because the reality is that your local elections are going to affect you way more than the presidential election.
Absolutely. Yeah, I got an email today that I need to dig through about our libraries and all sorts of things. Those are the ones that these are our communities. This is where we live. This is where our school funding comes from, our public access comes from. Those are the things that really we can feel an impact on in our day to day, whereas the presidential portion, obviously it matters because these are the people that are electing other government officials who
Yeah.
are going to be voting on really big issues. However, be informed, right? That if you leave with anything from this episode is be an informed voter, do your research, dig below the surface, reach out to people who can help you answer these questions, especially the finance stuff, because it is very confusing. It can be difficult to understand, especially when you're trying to dig below the surface.
You said it. I think that's a perfect way to wrap up.
All right.
Sugar
Go
Daddy
vote, y'all.
Podcast, yo. Learn how to make them pockets grow.